Broncos country, welcome to the week 3 preview of the Denver Broncos traveling to Miami to take on the Miami Dolphins. Now listen, I'm always optimistic and I'm always hopeful that the Broncos are going to win, and I've liked what I've seen through the first 2 weeks on the offensive side of the ball because last season the offense struggled and it was the defense, but this year seemingly the roles have flipped. The offense looked spectacular. Now we do need to continue that momentum into the second half. And the defense is struggling. Now, I'm always optimistic. I'm always hopeful that the Broncos are going to pull out a win, but I just don't know if that is going to happen this week. The Dolphins are one of the best teams in the entire NFL, and as much as I'd like to get a win, and as much as I'm hopeful and a little bit optimistic that it can happen, I don't know how realistic that is going to be. Now, I hope I'm proven wrong, and I'm hoping the Broncos do pull out that week 3 dub, get the first win of the season, because you know the stats. Teams that start 0-3 are more than likely going to miss the playoffs, and if the Broncos lose this game, the season could already be over before it's even began. So, with that being said, let's jump into the preview. And of course, as always, I want to remind you that Jesus is King. He died on the cross for your sins. And it's through the works of Jesus and him dying on the cross that we get to go to heaven. There's nothing that we can do to get to heaven, but it's all through Jesus and what he did on the cross. And by believing in him and with our whole heart and accepting him as our Lord and Savior, that is how we get to heaven. It's an important message to me that I like to share before every single one of my videos. So, yeah. I always am going to share it. And with that being said, let's jump in to the preview. Now, starting off, let's go through the injuries for both the Broncos and the Dolphins. And before we get into the injuries, I just want to say, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as the support is greatly appreciated. We are getting close to 500 subscribers, so if you could subscribe and help me reach that goal, that would mean the absolute world to me. And if you could leave a like to help spread the video out and get it out to more people, that would mean the world to me as well. So if you could do those two things, that'd be awesome. Now, as for the injuries, the Broncos have 4 players that were on the injured list, injured reserve. Frank Clark is dealing with that hip injury post week 1, so he will be out this week. Justin Simmons has been dealing with a hip injury. Maybe he came back a little bit too soon. That is why he was struggling in the first 2 weeks. He'll be out in week 3 versus the Dolphins, which I would expect the safeties this week to be Kareem Jackson and De'Laren Turner-Yell. I would expect those two to be the 2 safeties, and then rookie J.L. Skinner should be active for this game as well. Mike Purcell is dealing with an ankle injury, and he is questionable for the game. Garrett Bowles was also dealing with an ankle injury, and it is unspecified whether or not he's going to play. I would expect him to play, but if he doesn't, Cam Fleming will be taking his spot at left tackle. Now for the Dolphins. The Dolphins have a lot of injuries. Salvon Ahmed has a groin injury. He is doubtful for the game. Teron Armstead has a back, knee, and ankle injury, and he is questionable. That could be big. He is one of the better tackles in the league, and if he's out, the Broncos could take advantage of the backup tackle for the Dolphins. Elijah Campbell has a knee injury. He's questionable. Same thing with Raquan Davis with a wrist injury. Julian Hill has an ankle injury, and he is questionable. And both tight end Tyler Croft and edge rusher Jalen Phillips are dealing with back injuries. They are both questionable as well. Jalen Waddle is dealing with a concussion. He is questionable for the game. Tyreek Hill is dealing with an ankle injury. It is unspecified whether or not he's going to play. And Andrew Van Ginkel is also dealing with an ankle injury, and it is unspecified whether or not he is going to play. Now, the reason I'm highlighting Jalen Waddle here and not Tyreek Hill is because I do expect Tyreek Hill to play with his ankle injury. I don't think it's going to be that severe, but I'm highlighting Jalen Waddle because he has a concussion. It still says he's questionable, so he definitely could go, but he is out of the two. Between Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I would expect Waddle to be the one who misses this game if one of the two miss it. So that's why he is highlighted, because then I would believe Braxton Berrios would step up as that wide receiver number 2 there. But yeah, that's why I have him highlighted over Tyreek Hill. But I'd say the most interesting ones to keep an eye out for tomorrow, or I guess not tomorrow's game. I keep saying tomorrow, but for Sunday's game is going to be Teron Armstead. I would say Quan Davis I'd look at. I'd say Jalen Phillips, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill. Those would be the 5 that I would look at. Of course, all injuries are going to make an impact, but those 5 I'd be looking at to or have the most impact if they miss the game. So I would look for those 5 players to see if they will be playing or not. Here is my 3 keys to victory. Number 1, if the Broncos want to win this game, we have to get pressure on Tua. Tua has been able to sit in the pocket and dice up defenses. Of course, it's nice when you have the 2 speedsters in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but you have to get pressure on Tua if you want any chance of winning this game. Number 2, Vance Joseph has to have competent defensive play calling, which I don't know if that's going to happen. This week of all weeks, I wouldn't shadow Pat's, or okay, if only one of Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill's playing, then I would have Pat Surtain shadowing whichever one's playing. But if they're both playing, I would just have Pat Surtain playing on one side of the ball because Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are both deadly. But I just don't know, because in week 1 and week 2, Vance Joseph just didn't shadow Pat Surtain on Devontae Adams in week 1, and he didn't shadow him on Terry McLaurin in week 2. So I don't know. Vance Joseph just has to be a competent play caller, because Vic Fangio, when he was calling the plays for the defense was elite. Giro Evero last season, it was elite. And this year, Vance Joseph he has that bend but don't break defense, which I hate. But hopefully Vance Joseph gets back on track, but I don't know about that one. And then number 3, offense puts the foot on the gas. And what I mean by that is, with the Broncos offense and how efficient we've been, I expect us to score a decent amount in the first half. But even if we're up by, I mean, I don't know if we're going to be up in the second half, but theoretically, let's just say theoretically we're up in the second half, you have to keep your foot on the gas and keep scoring and scoring and scoring, because we saw the Commanders come back last week, and the Dolphins have one of the best offenses in the NFL, so they're going to be able to catch up and potentially come back if we are up at the half in the second half. So you have to be able to put the foot on the gas and keep scoring and scoring and scoring, because the Dolphins aren't going to let up. And if you start to coast and start to play conservative like we did last week, the Dolphins will come back and win the game. As for the previous games between the two teams, of course, for the Broncos, we played the Raiders in week 1 and lost 16-17 at home. Week 2, we also had another home game, back-to-back home games, and we lost 33-35 in a heartbreaker versus the Commanders. As for the Dolphins, this will be their first home game this week, because in week 1, they traveled to Los Angeles to play the Chargers and won in a 36-34 fashion. And last week, of course, on Sunday Night Football, they went to New England to play the Patriots and won 24-17. So, the quarterback matchup, Russell Wilson, he has had a great bounce-back season. He has looked phenomenal so far. 45 completions on 66 attempts. That is a 68.2% completion percentage, which is really good in the NFL to have a high 60% completion percentage. It's really good. He's thrown for 485 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, and has a quarterback rating of a 62.5. Now, if you want to take out the Hail Mary, go ahead, you can take it out, but I'm just counting it because the Hail Mary happened. We completed the Hail Mary, so I will count it as a part of the stats for Russell Wilson and Brandon Johnson. As for Tua, Tua has had a great season this year. 49 completions on 75 attempts, a 65.3% completion percentage. Still a really good completion percentage. Same thing with Russ. In that mid to high 60s, it's a phenomenal completion percentage. 715 yards through 2 weeks, though. That is really impressive. Of course, you have got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to stretch the field, but still very impressive for Tua. Has 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and has a quarterback rating of a 79. Of course, remember that a quarterback rating, if it's a 50, that is average for the league. If it's below 50, it's that quarterback has been throwing below average, and if it's above 50, it's above average. Just keep that in mind. Now, Javonte Williams going up against the Dolphins front 7. We have got to get not only Javonte Williams, but Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin more involved in the running game because look at this. Through 2 weeks, Javonte Williams has 25 rushing attempts for 96 yards, only a 3.8 average, 6 receptions for 19 yards, and no touchdowns, both on the ground or through the air. In fact, the only rushing touchdown this season from a running back has come through Jaleel McLaughlin on that 5-yard run to open up the scoring in last week's game. We have to get Javonte more carries. I've got to get Samaje more carries. Same thing with Jaleel McLaughlin as well. And we got to establish the run game and get some more rushing touchdowns. That's going to be a big key to really turning the season around for the Broncos. Next up, of course, the Dolphins front seven here. This is the Dolphins front seven. Christian Wilkins, Raquan Davis, Zach Seiler, Jalen Phillips, David Long, Jerome Baker, and of course, we know number 2 very well in Bradley Chubb, former Bronco, who was dealt to the Dolphins at the trade deadline last season. So far this season, these 7 players have gotten a total of 69 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 9 quarterback hits. A very impressive defensive front. I think that, of course, Washington, who we played last week, has the best front 7. But the Dolphins also have a really good front 7 as well. So it doesn't get much easier. Next up, the Broncos front 7 versus Raheem Mostert. Here is the Broncos front 7 consisting of Zach Allen, DJ Jones, Jonathan Harris, Jonathan Cooper, Josie Jewell, Alex Singleton, and Randy Gregory. Now, this is the starting front 7, obviously, but I would like to see Drew Sanders get some snaps at that inside linebacker position, the 3rd-round rookie. He was really impressive in the preseason, so I'd like to see him maybe rotate in sometimes for either Alex Singleton or Josie Jewell. But these 7 players so far this season, 63 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, which all came in last week's game versus the Commanders. I believe we actually technically... do we have 3 or 4 sacks? Because this isn't counting the whole defense. This is just counting these front 7. I think it's 4 because Nick Bonito also had a sack last week that wasn't counted in the starting 7 here, and then 7 quarterback hits. As for Raheem Mostert, he has had a phenomenal season to start the year. 28 rushing attempts, 158 yards, 5.6 average yards per carry, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and then through the air, 3 receptions, 19 yards, no touchdowns. But on the ground, Raheem Mostert has been very effective. I wasn't super high on Raheem Mostert coming into the season, but I mean, he has proven me wrong, and he's had a phenomenal season to start out. Next up for the receivers versus the corners, I guess Broncos receivers versus the Dolphins corners, we got Jerry Jeudy matching up against Xavier Howard, Courtland Sutton versus Kader Kahu, and then Marvin Mims versus Eli Apple. And Eli Apple and Kader Kahu could easily swap if you think Kader Kahu will be able to guard the speed of Marvin Mims easier. This is just the 3 starting cornerbacks for the Dolphins. As for Jerry Jeudy versus Xavier Howard, last week in Jerry Jeudy's inaugural game, his first game of the season, he had 3 receptions on 5 targets, 25 yards, no touchdowns, and I wanted to do an average depth of target just for Jerry Jeudy because his route running ability and just ability to get open is insanely impressive, and he haven't had an average depth target of an 8.2. As for Xavier Howard, I mean, he is still one of the best corners in the league. He was targeted 13 times, allowed 9 completions, which is a little bit high for Xavier Howard, but he is still a really good corner. Has allowed 61 yards, a completion percentage of a 69.2%, has allowed a passer rating of a 47.3. I mean, yeah, that is very low. That is really good for Xavier Howard, and he has 1 interception and no touchdowns allowed this season. As for Courtland Sutton versus Kader Kahu, Sutton has 9 receptions on 12 targets, 98 yards, 1 touchdown, and a 21. His reception of 21 yards was his longest. I always don't know how to word that when that comes up, but the thing I notice about Sutton is, I mean, he needs to be targeted maybe a little bit more. But I've been impressed with Sutton, Jeudy, Mims, and Brandon Johnson so far this season, even Lil Jordan Humphrey. But the fact that through 2 games, Courtland Sutton doesn't have a 100 yards yet is kind of insane. I think we only have one receiver over 100 yards, and that's Marvin Mims. So I'd like to see the receivers more involved. I'd like to see the running backs more involved, but that's, of course, just a wish. We'll have to see what happens on Sunday. As for Kader Kohou, he was targeted 9 times, allowed 9 completions for 62 yards, obviously 100% completion percentage, allowed a pass rating of a 95.4, no interceptions, but no touchdowns allowed. So, to me, I would say stay away from the side of the field of the receiver that Xavier Howard is covering. Target Kader, target Eli, but, I mean, still, it's going to be a hard win. But if I were the offensive coordinator, if I was Sean Payton, I'd say just stay away from Xavier Howard because obviously he is one of the best corners in all of football. As for Marvin Mims versus Eli Apple, Marvin Mims has had a really good start to his career. 4 receptions on 4 targets, has 122 yards, 1 touchdown, and his longest, of course, being that 60-yard bomb for the 2nd touchdown last week against Washington. I mean, Marvin Mims just has that speed, and speed kills. I would say this is our version of Tyreek Hill with the speed, a little bit undersized, but Marvin Mims has been super impressive, and he's really impressed me to start off his career. I would expect, or I would hope Marvin Mims gets more targets because he only got 2 targets last week. Of course, the first one being that long touchdown, the next one being that huge gain down the left sideline in the second quarter. Wasn't targeted after that. Really wasn't so he wasn't targeted like the rest of the second quarter or the second half. Marvin Mims absolutely needs more targets in week 3 if we want to pull out a win. As for Eli Apple this season, he's actually started off pretty decent, but I still don't think Eli Apple is the greatest corner. 12 targets, 7 completions, allowed 71 yards, completion percentage of a 58.3, passer rating of a 75.3, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and no touchdowns allowed. So, I mean, he's had a solid start, but still not the greatest corner. I mean, I'm just thankful right now that Jalen Ramsey is not playing, because Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard locking down receivers, that would be a not so fun time for the offense. Of course, I don't want to see any players injured, and it sucks that Jalen Ramsey is injured, but it's good for the Broncos that we got scheduled, I guess, in the early portion for the Dolphins, because I mean, I just don't want to see any players get injured. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't want to see any players get injured. It is helpful, of course, for the Broncos, but it does suck to see Jalen Ramsey injured because, he's been a solid football player throughout his career with Jacksonville, then in LA, now he goes to Miami. I believe he'll come back like week 6, week 7, something like that. But yeah, for right now, it'll be Xavier Howard, Kader Kohou, and Eli Apple. For the Broncos at the tight end position, it's going to be Adam Troutman. These are pretty much the same exact stats as last week. He just got one more target. He had 5 receptions on 5 targets, 34 yards, 0 touchdowns, 15 as his longest reception. Last week, he just got 1 target this week, and that's really all that changed. That's all I can really say right now. As for Jevon Holland has become one of the best safeties in the league. Was targeted 12 times, allowed 9 completions, 75% completion percentage, 101 yards, passer rating of a 99.7. So he started the year off pretty slow, but has no interceptions. But also the big one is he has not allowed a touchdown. Yeah, I think Jevon Holland is one of the best safeties in the league. Very, very talented, and not going to be easy to throw against, even with Jalen Ramsey out, and, even, maybe you say, oh, we got a matchup advantage with Kader Kohou or Eli Apple. I mean, you still got to deal with Jevon Holland deep in coverage, so it's not going to be easy for Russell Wilson and the passing offense this week. As for the Broncos corners versus the Dolphins receivers, we got Pat Surtain versus Tyreek Hill. So far this season, Pat Surtain has picked up right where he's left off as one of the best corners in the NFL. 6 targets, only has allowed 1 completion, 19 yards total, completion percentage of a 16.7 when thrown against, and a passer rating of a 40.3 when thrown against, which is really, really good. No interceptions because, well, he's hardly thrown at, but he also hasn't allowed a touchdown this season. Yeah, Pat Surtain, I don't know if he'll be going up against Tyreek Hill. Maybe he'll go up against his former Alabama teammate in Jalen Waddle. Or, maybe he'll just play the left side of the field for the whole game. We will have to see. As for Tyreek Hill, he's had a really good start to the season. 16 receptions on 24 targets. He has 255 yards, 3 touchdowns, and we're going to do the average, not the longest reception for the Dolphins, because the average, catch for Tyreek Hill is 15.9 yards, which is just insane. And this should show Broncos fans just how deadly the Dolphins' passing attack is. As for Damari Mathis versus Jalen Waddle, Damari Mathis, we were all expecting him to have a big breakout year 2, and he has really struggled. Was horrible in the first game, a little bit better in the second game, but still not good. And Riley Moss is ready to go. He is back from his injury, so I'd say Damari Mathis, if he's starting, which I'd expect him to, he's going to be on a short leash. And, maybe if he starts to struggle, you throw Riley Moss, who you traded up for in the 3rd round, out there to see what he can do. But Damari Mathis this season, 9 targets, has allowed 9 completions, 93 yards, 100% completion percentage when thrown against, a passer rating of 149.3, has no interceptions, and has allowed 2 touchdowns this season. If I were the Dolphins, I would throw Damari Mathis' way until he starts to lock down a receiver, until he starts to shut down that receiver and play solid defense, obviously. I would throw his way. That would be my offensive game plan right now, would be to throw to the side that Damari Mathis is covering. As for Jalen Waddle, he's had a really good season as well. 8 receptions on 11 targets, 164 yards. Doesn't have a touchdown yet. That might change this week if he, of course, is playing this week. And his average reception is about 20.5 yards down the field. So this is just insane how much. Oh my goodness, this is just insane. It's gonna be potentially a long day if both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are playing. As for Essang Bassey covering Braxton Berrios, Essang Bassey's had a really good year. Of course, was an undrafted free agent, I believe, 2 seasons ago. Was on the Broncos active roster. Then we moved into the practice squad. Then he was signed off the practice squad by the Chargers. The Chargers released him, and now he's back in Denver. And he had a really good preseason, and he's had a really good start to the season as well. He was targeted twice, allowed 1 completion for 5 yards, and I believe that time he was targeted, it was on the Logan Thomas pass last week in week 2. Obviously, completion percentage of 50% when thrown against him, passer rating of a 56.2, no interceptions in the regular season, and no touchdowns allowed because Essang Bassey has been really good and really just locking down that slot. As the slot corner, the nickel corner, if you will. I've been really impressed with Essang Bassey. And then, of course, Braxton Berrios, the former Jet this season, has 5 receptions on 8 targets, 70 yards, no touchdowns, but has an average of 14, average reception of 14 yards per play. So, they throw the ball deep, because they have a bunch of speedy receivers. Braxton Berrios, speedy. Jalen Waddle, really speedy. Tyreek Hill, I was just really speedy, obviously. So they got some fast receivers, and it might be a tough day for the Broncos secondary, especially with Justin Simmons being out this week. For the tight end, it is going to be Durham Smythe as the starter. At least that is what I've seen. He's had 6 receptions on 10 targets, 67 yards, I guess an average of 11.2 yards and no touchdowns this season. Yeah, sometimes the average and the longest the longest reception of the season, it's kind of hard to word and make it flow properly. So I apologize for that. As for the safety for the Broncos, it's going to be Kareem Jackson. The veteran will be the starting strong safety. And then, of course, this week, I would expect the starting free safety to be second-year player out of Oklahoma, Delaren Turner Yell, the fifth-round pick last season. I would expect those two to be the starting safeties, and then J.L. Skinner potentially also getting some reps back there. But I will say Essang Bassey was moved to safety at the end of last week's game, kind of played there with Delaren Turner Yell. So if Essang Bassey moves back to safety again, I could see the cornerbacks being Surtain, Riley Moss, or Surtain, Damari Mathis, and Riley Moss. But so far this season, Kareem Jackson has been targeted 6 times, allowed 3 completions for 64 yards, 56 completion percentage against, allowed a passer rating of an 88.2, which is it's a little high. So yeah, but Kareem Jackson is also getting up there in age, and he has 1 interception this season and has allowed 1 touchdown, and the touchdown was who was it to? I think it was to Logan Thomas, and that's when he had that hit, which got him ejected from the game. So, yeah, those are Kareem Jackson stats in terms of the safety position. Now, let's look at the Broncos pass rush versus the Dolphins offensive line, and I got to say, I really like the Dolphins offensive line. I think it's one of the better units with Teron Armstead at left tackle, Isaiah Wynn at left guard, Connor Williams at center, Robert Hunt at right guard, and Austin Jackson at right tackle. Through the 2 games this season, the Dolphins offensive line has given up 1 sack, has allowed 7 pressures, which is a pressure percentage of a 9.1%, which is crazy good. They have, or I guess Tua's been hit 3 times, he's been hurried 3 times, and teams have blitzed 31 times against this Dolphins offensive line. And for the Broncos pass rush, we have 4 sacks on the season with 9 total quarterback pressures. As for the Broncos offensive line versus Dolphins pass rush, I was expecting and having high hopes for this offensive line. Have kind of struggled this season, I'll be honest, especially in that week 2 game versus Washington. But here is the Broncos offensive line. We got Garrett Bowles at left tackle, Ben Powers at left guard, Lloyd Cushenberry at center, Quinn Miners, who in my opinion is our best offensive lineman, at right guard, and Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. And through the 2 games this season, the Broncos offensive line has given up 9 sacks, which is credited to them. But of course, you got to remember that Russell Wilson, he is going to hold on to the ball for longer. He's going to try and make a play, so he's going to take those extra sacks. So not necessarily all of them are against the offensive line, but 9 total sacks have been given up this season, as well as allowing 22 pressures, which is a pressure percentage of a 27.8%, which is crazy high. There have been 2 quarterback hits against Russell Wilson. He's been hurried 11 times, and the offensive line has been blitzed against 19 times. As for the Dolphins pass rush, they have a total of 7 sacks through the whole defensive unit and 14 pressures on the season. So, yeah, it is going to be potentially another long day for the Broncos offensive line. Hopefully they can bounce back and have, obviously, that bounce back game. But only Sunday will tell, and we will have to see what happens on Sunday. So, my final thoughts. What is my final score prediction? Well, I hate to say it because I hate picking the Broncos to lose, but I got to say my final score prediction is going to be Broncos 24, Dolphins 31. I guess, so final score of 31-24 Broncos loss. I hope I'm proven wrong, but this Dolphins team is just really, really good. So, I mean, maybe we can steal a win, but I don't know. I'm always hopeful, but this Dolphins team is really, really good. Week 4 for the Broncos will be another away game in Chicago at Soldier Field, Chicago, Illinois, at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. as well as this game will also be at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time versus the Dolphins. So make sure to be up for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what you think is going to happen to the Broncos here in week 3 in the comment section below. But my name is Parker, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.